This is the Sony Xperia Pro-I, a smartphone with a 1-inch camera sensor on the back, the same sensor from the Sony RX100 Mark VII. It also has a 16 and 50 millimeter lens, but they're still working on the software for those, so we'll review those later. I am going to test it out, but first I'm going to show you all the cool design elements. Notice that it has an attachment point for a hand strap, so you don't necessarily have to carry a case. It has a dedicated shutter button. Hold it down to open your camera app or half press it to focus. Half press, half press. Next to it, there's a button to open up the video app. The third button there is a fingerprint scanner that unlocks your phone automatically. On the top, a real headphone jack for either listening to music or monitoring audio when you're recording video. And of course, it's got all those things you wish your camera had, like anti-theft technology, GPS, cellular connections. It will automatically upload your pictures and back them up to the cloud, so even if you lose your camera, you don't lose your pictures. Let's take this out and vlog with it. Sony's thought about how vloggers might use a smartphone. They put a microphone in the back, which should provide for better sound quality. They've also given it Bluetooth compatibility with their remote that I use for my Sony vlogging camera. Even most importantly, they're releasing a screen that attaches to the rear of the camera, which allows you to see yourself. And that allows you to use the rear camera. See, every smartphone has a terrible front-facing camera because they have to make it as small as possible. This footage is shot with the iPhone 13 Pro Max using the front camera because it doesn't have a rear screen available, and thus I'm forced to use the rear camera. This is shot with the iPhone 13 Pro Max's rear screen just for a comparison. I can't see myself when I do this. You want to take advantage of that nice big camera in the back so you get a little bit of background blur. Speaking of background blur, let's... As we get close, these new smartphone lenses are so powerful that they actually can blur the background out a little bit, but sometimes you have a nice background and you want it to be nice and sharp. The biggest difference between this and the iPhone is that this has an aperture that can shut down from f2 to f4. That's a 2-stop difference. Now I shut it down to f4. That closes the aperture, something I can physically see, and it also brings the background more into focus. That is something the iPhone cannot do. Okay, so far so good, but the first night I got it, I took it out for night photography and put it up against my iPhone 13. And, well, look at them side by side. The iPhone 13's computational photography absolutely crushed the Sony Xperia Pro-I. But I thought, I'm testing this like a smartphone and not like a camera. If it were a camera, I would put it on a tripod. I would take 30-second exposures. I would bracket my shots and combine them and maximize the dynamic range. So I did that. And you know what? The results were pretty amazing. When I put the time into it, the Xperia rewarded me and absolutely blew away my brand new iPhone 13 Pro Max. Look how many more stars you can see in the Xperia shot. Everything is so much sharper on the Xperia. But if you're not a photographer, if you're not interested in learning photography or taking your time to produce optimal images, the iPhone would probably be better for you. But this can do more, especially in the hands of a skilled and patient photographer. And if you want to learn photography, this is the camera for you. I took this out to Devil's Hop Yard after dusk, when the park is technically closed, to get some long exposure shots of the waterfall. This allowed me to get 30-second exposures, blurring out the water. Even on a tripod, I couldn't override the iPhone's intelligence and coax more than 1/30th of a second out of it. As a result, the water looks choppy. With the Sony, I was able to shoot at a full 30 seconds. This is a bracketed and blended exposure. That's why it shows 8 seconds here. But look how beautiful and smooth the water is. And look how rich the fall colors are from the long exposure. Look at this detail of the fall leaves that fell on the rock. Nice and orange on the Sony, completely black and white on the iPhone. Those improvements didn't really carry over into video, where the longer exposures didn't benefit. The Sony exposed this shot better, and as we zoom in, you'll be able to see that the Sony also captured more details in these rocks, though it has a lot of color noise. The iPhone really can't do long exposures. There are a few apps, but I find they produce very choppy results because it just wasn't designed as a camera. Sony is the only company that makes both smartphones and cameras, and I think that's why they have a unique take on this and why this smartphone in particular is interesting to photographers. What about urban scenes with artificial lights? How would they handle low light plus high contrast? Shooting casually handheld like any civilian would, the iPhone produced better results. It captured more dynamic range thanks to its computational photography. But wait, I put the Sony on a tripod and bracketed a series of images. Let's see how it compares. You can see the Sony captured even more detail in the highlights. The Sony also captured stars in the night sky that the iPhone couldn't see at all. Here again, the iPhone did better just handheld, but when I put this on the tripod, bracketed my shots, took my time, it produced better results than I could get with the iPhone, even using a tripod. I want to see how they perform in the day, so I took both cameras out to Mystic, Connecticut and shot side by side. And here the results were kind of surprising. Zooming in 400% on these Halloween decorations, we can see the iPhone image is simply clearer. I tested the macro capabilities by focusing as close to this flower as I could. This is the photo with the Sony, and this is the photo with the iPhone. The macro capabilities of the new iPhone 13 Pro are pretty amazing. Both have 12 megapixel cameras, but they didn't produce the same results. And they were both good, they were both passable, but in good light, the iPhone actually had better images. And how could that be when this sensor is so much bigger? We're going to have to get nerdy and dig into the math just a little bit. First, the Xperia here seems to have a base ISO of 100, while the iPhone has a base ISO of 40. ISO is linear, so it gathers twice as much light per square inch as the Sony, but the Sony has a 25% bigger sensor. Obviously, the iPhone is gathering more total light. Thus, it's capable of producing cleaner images when you have lots of light. For more information, watch my video on optimal image quality. There's another factor, and that's crop factor. The Xperia Pro-I does have a 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor, but it only uses 12 megapixels of that sensor. Additionally, the lens here is f2. When you do the crop factor math, I have a video on that, you end up with a 24mm f7 full frame equivalent lens. Now consider the iPhone 13 Pro Max. When you do the math on that, you end up with a 26mm f6.8 lens. This means that both these phones gather about the same total amount of light and should produce images with about the same background blur and about the same noise in low light conditions, assuming the sensors have similar technology, which they seem to. If you follow my channel, you know bigger sensors don't always produce better results. What I found was the Sony Xperia Pro-I does indeed produce better results with a skilled photographer who's willing to take the time. Dramatically better results. This is definitely the camera I would want to take with me when I want to be serious about my photography, when I want to enjoy the hobby of photography and produce the best quality images. If there's somebody who doesn't want to learn about f-stops or use a tripod and just wants to snap photos that look great, in this particular comparison, I think the iPhone still does an amazing job. This camera, by the way, is about $1,800, so it's actually a little more expensive than the iPhone 13 Pro, but it also kind of does a lot more. I love the shutter button. I love the manual controls. I love this camera overall. If you're a serious photographer, definitely take a look at this. Be sure to subscribe and like to see our full tutorial and review of the iPhone 13 Pro as well as the Google Pro 6. Now I want to take a second and just give a few suggestions to my friends at the Sony engineering team. My favorite thing about Sony is they actually listen to feedback, and I see my suggestions show up in future products. So this is my selfish part where I try to shape the future of this smartphone. First, can I say, I like using this on a tripod, but having to clamp it into something is awkward and it covers up some of the buttons. The iPhones have a magnetic system and there are attachments you can get to attach that directly to a tripod, and it works so much better than clamps. The user interface does not rotate to vertical when I take pictures. People use their phones for vertical stuff, like mostly. The shutter speed only goes up to 30 seconds, which is way more than any other camera phone I've ever used, but I would love if it went up to 2 minutes or 3 minutes. Give me a bulb mode, and while you're at it, give me an intervalometer so I can stack images like star trails. I would also love to have a bracketing feature so I don't have to do it manually, and some way to trigger flashes or strobes in my studio so I could get real professionally lit portraits with this. Thank you, Sony, for finally making a camera for photographers, and I can't wait to see what comes next.